Hi, my name's Jo and I'm an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator based in the UK. Thank you for joining me today. This is my Monday mashup session. So each Monday I mix up some products or some stamp sets or something just to create something a little bit different. And it suddenly occurred to me when I was looking through some of my cards that I'd made that I hadn't actually got a great deal of new baby or young children's type cards, and I thought it would be quite fun to try and create one today. So this is the card we're making, but I'm going to make one for a little boy this time so that I've got one of each to hand. And we're using two stamp sets. So we're using Wildly Happy. I love this stamp set. Specifically, which drew me to this actually was the elephants, because I do love the elephants, but the other elements are all so pretty, and especially these little bunnies which we're going to be using today. They're really, really cute. So that's Wildly Happy. And we're also going to be using this brilliant stamp called Monogram Messages. I like this because you can sort of make up sort of different things for the letters. So it's quite a nice sort of one to have in your collection, really, especially the balloons work really well with the birthday one and things like that. So it's just a really nice sort of set. So they're the two we're going to be using today. And I have created my own background here, so I'm going to show you how I've done this, and then we can you can see how it builds up and how it develops. Okay, so we're going to start off with that, but first of all we have our base card. Now this is Balmy Blue, so this measures 14.85 by 21 centimeters, scored at 10.5 to give us our card base. Now, for this one, I used Blushing Bride and Rococo Rose, just so that you know which colours I used. So I'm going to use Balmy Blue, but I'm also going to add a little bit of Misty Moonlight in places just to give me a little bit of colour. So it sort of gives me a little bit of depth, okay? So that's our card base. And you also need a piece of Whisper White cardstock. And this measures 6 centimeters across by 14.85 centimeters down. So it's exactly the same size as our card. Okay, so I'm going to move these out of the way. The next thing I did was create myself a stencil. So I have done this using the Stitched Stars dies. So I just selected 4 different sort of sizes and created a bit of a template. You need quite a bit of a gap between them because obviously otherwise you're going to get ink sort of seeping through, so just be careful of that. And this was just a scrap piece that I had sort of hanging around, really. So as you can see, this is what I used also for the pink. So I'm going to start off with my Balmy Blue, and I'm going to be using our finger daubers to do this, but you can use any sponge or whatever you like to use. So, you know, just use whatever you're comfortable with. And I'm just going to hold my stencil in place. Now, I'm not sticking this down or anything, but if you prefer to, you can do that. But I kind of, I like to hold it because I can move it very easily. And if you're careful, you're absolutely fine. These are brand new daubers, so I'm just trying to load them up with quite a bit of ink because they take a while to sort of to get moving, really. So I'm going to come in very lightly, and I'm using little circular motions just to lay down my base colour. Now I like to use something that's quite light as a start because you know, otherwise it can build up very quickly without you realising. So I'm just using little circular motions just to build up that colour. Okay, now what I should have done was opened my other ink pad whilst I had a free hand. So this time it's Misty Moonlight. So what I'm going to do is hold that back down. Now this is obviously quite a lot darker, so I do need to be a little bit careful. So I'm just going off the edge here, and I'm gradually just going to work it in just to certain parts of my star here. You can obviously go as light or as dark as you want to. It's entirely up to you. I don't want it too dark, but I do want there to be a contrast. So I'm just building it up really slowly. Okay, so once I've added that dark, then what I'm going to do is just to go back over with the light, and that just helps just to blend everything in together. Okay, so you can see you can build up your colours really quite nicely. So what I did was I started with the large ones, and then I went back in and I added the small ones in the places that I wanted them to be. So I'm just going to do that now. I'll just start building these up. When you're doing any kind of masking, stenciling, you do just need to lay down layers rather than a really heavy colour, because otherwise it will just it won't have that sort of depth to it really. So you just need to be a little bit careful. And obviously these daubers, the quicker you're the more ink you're adding, the quicker they're going to darken, so just be aware of that. Okay, I'm going to do one more down here, virtually a whole one I think down here. So try and keep your daubers one to each colour if you can, just so that you don't contaminate the colours as you're doing this, because what can look really nice as well is if you're doing something like a birthday, you could use any shapes whatsoever, but for a birthday, for example, you could do it with a balloon or flowers or hearts or something like that, and you could actually make them two-tone colour completely, so two really contrasting colours. Something like a sort of a pink and a orange or something like that would blend really, really well together. Okay, so now I've added those. I think I've got enough large ones, but I can always come back in and add some more if I wanted to. But what I'm going to do is start adding some large ones. Now what I did was I actually positioned them so that they were sort of overlapping. So don't be afraid to overlap them, and then you can see the colours will start to come through. And you might find that you want to do, for example, some of the smaller ones really, really dark, or you might want to do some of these ones really, really light. It's entirely up to you. Just have a play around. And if you're not sure, have a go on some scrap paper first. So you can see you just get that nice contrast coming through. So some I overlap a lot, some I overlapped less. It's just entirely, you know, your choice. As I say, this works really well with all sorts of shapes. So it's another way to use our dies, makes them go that little bit further rather than just for cutting. When you mix these two, you almost get like a slightly sort of purpley tone almost. It's strange. It looks really nice. Okay, so I've got some other ones here, and this time I'm going to go quite dark. So I'm going to start off my page and just make this one a little bit darker than all the others. And I am just going to go in with a little bit of light just to blend through any places. So as I say, don't be frightened to add a darker few in. It doesn't matter. It's quite nice to get a mixture. You'll see this one is already starting to pick up some of the darker colour anyway. And then I'm just going to scatter some little ones around. So I'm going to do some dark. So I'm doing these really quick so that they're not, you know, I'm not putting down too much depth of colour. I'm just getting a nice sort of shade. So there's some of the darker ones. Now I'm going to come in and I'm just going to do some lighter ones as well. And these are great for filling the gaps up, but we're also going to be adding some coloured dots, which I will show you how to do those in a second. Okay, so I think I'm quite happy with that. So I'm going to move these out of the way for the time being. Okay, and I can actually now glue this to my card front. Circles would look really nice done with this technique as well. Just making sure it's all nice and flat. Okay, and I thought what would be quite nice for this one, rather than the dotty ribbon, which is quite sort of feminine, I'm going to be using some linen thread on this. I thought it would give it a nice sort of different look. So all I've done is I've wrapped this twice around my card. With the ribbon, I obviously only did it the once. Just going to give myself a little bit extra to tie my bow. Okay, so because linen thread is quite fine, you can afford to give yourself a double knot with it. So that's what I tend to do, just to get it to stay in place when I'm using it for this sort of thing. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to separate these very slightly, just so that you can see that there's two sort of lines of the thread. And then I'm going to tie just a little bow. Again, I do this upside down. I find it gives you a lot better bow. I never have sort of understood why, but it does definitely seem to give you a nicer shaped bow. So obviously you can just rearrange that how you want it rearranged, and also size. Take your pick what sort of size you're looking for. I want something reasonably small. Looks about right. So I'm just going to trim the ends. I've left them quite long, and then I can adjust them if I want to further down the line. So the next thing I did was to stamp my bee. Okay, so this is, as I said, is taken from the Monogram Messages stamp set. And I think what I'm going to do is, because I want this to stand out more so on here than on this one, I'm going to be using the Misty Moonlight just to put my bee in place. I'm just going to ink that. It's quite a solid stamp, so just make sure it does get a nice cover in. And you can see roughly where I've positioned it, so you just want it up on this side here. Okay, now you can see what I mean. This is quite not as clear. It disappears on this one because it's on the same colour, but this is sort of how it's meant to look. So don't feel that you need to sort of fill it in any more detail unless you feel that you really need to. And if I was going to fill it in, I would take something like a blender pen. I'll show you, actually I've got one to hand. So I would take something like a blender pen, and I would just try and pull that colour through just to fill out any little coloured gaps there. I don't actually mind the little gaps, if I'm honest, but I wouldn't add any more ink. I would certainly just use a blender pen or something like that. Don't overwork it though, because it will sort of smudge the colour around a little bit. And if you do get a tiny piece like I've got there, just blot it on. Again, with my pen, I'm just picking up ink off what was left on my stamp. So there we go. So that's our birthday. Now, when I was making my template, I actually one of the stars that actually came out of it was perfect size to add this is for baby on it. So I thought it was quite a cute little sort of saying. So all I'm going to do is to grab myself a little scrap of Whisper White, and literally is a little scrap. And I think this time I might do this into the lighter colour. So this is Balmy Blue. And stamp baby and is for. Okay, so the reason I'm doing all this first is because I am going to show you how I coloured the bunnies in a little while, but we're going to do our little dots on here in a moment, and they do need a little bit of time to dry. So that's why I'm doing all this section first, and then that can be drying whilst we're finishing off. So all I'm doing is just fussy cutting really roughly around these letters, just to give it sort of a little border, because I wanted to sort of stick them at sort of a little angle. Okay, so I'm just going to move these over here while I quickly stick them in place. Oops. Okay, I'm going to use just a pair of tweezers just to bring those over. Okay, now I actually stuck these on using our dimensional, so our 3D foam pads, and I just literally just stuck one onto the center of the star. And you can just position it wherever you want to position it, really. I'm going to stick my little bunnies down here again, so I just need to make sure I've got enough room for them, that's all. So now what I'm going to do is to add these little dots that we've got here. So these are quite easy to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to mix up a little bit of paste, okay? So I'm going to pop that to one side. So this is our Frost White all-purpose ink. So this is our shimmery paint. It's lovely stuff. I absolutely adore this stuff, and I do use it quite a lot, and quite a lot using this method that I'm using here. So I'm just literally just putting a little drop onto my desk here. I'll quickly wipe this up before it actually dries. And then I've got the Balmy Blue re-inker. So I'm just going to put a little spot of that on top. And then using one of my palette knives here, I'm just going to mix this through. Now, obviously, if you're doing it on your desk, just be a little bit sort of careful. And once it's all mixed through, I'm just going to try and pull it all together so that I get like a little blob here in the middle. And then I'm going to take just a ball tool, so any kind of embossing tool. So my Stampin' Up! One's not to hand at the moment, but any kind of ball tool or modelling tool. And all we're going to do is just to dip it in our ink, and then I'm literally going to just dot it, and they will get progressively smaller as you go through. Don't be afraid if it doesn't quite do you a circle to begin with, just go back and be careful, but you will be able to just add another. Okay, so I think I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to add one more down there. And as I say, once you've done this, because it's only a little small amount, you just wipe it up with a wet towel and that will dry off. So I'm going to pop that to one side because I want that to dry. It does take sort of 15 to 20 minutes or so. So just bear that in mind when you're doing this. But, you know, as long as we're careful, we'll be absolutely fine. So I'm going to pop that out of the way. And now what I want to do is to bring in some more Whisper White. So again, I'm just using an oddment that I've got hanging around. And I want to stamp my bunnies. So as I say, these were from the Wildly Happy stamp set. And because I'm going to be using Stampin Blends, I'm going to be using my Memento ink pad. So I'm just going to stamp that down. So to colour these, we're just using 3 Stampin Blends and also the colour lifter. So that's light and dark crumb cake, and that is dark petal pink, and then the colour lifter. And the colour lifter is going to create our shadows for us. So these sort of white patches that you can see here, these are all created using this and also the way we colour it. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to add, so I don't forget, because I do sometimes forget, is just to add some of this petal pink just to the inside of the earlobes. That is all we use that for, so that has now been used. And I'm just going to run underneath a little bit of the colour lifter, and that will just soften the edges of the Stampin Blends, because you do get quite a harsh sort of edge to them. So as I say, I've got dark and light crumb cake, and I'm going to be using the thin ends of these. I find I have a lot more control under the thin ends, so it's entirely up to you what you prefer, but I'm definitely going to be using the thin. So I'm going to remove the lids because it's much easier for me to hold them then. And also my colour lifter. So I'm going to start with one of these ears, and I'm going to lay down a little bit of the dark crumb. I'm then going to come in and in little circular motions, I'm going to blend the light and dark together. Okay, now what you'll find will happen is that you'll start to get a lighter effect all over because I've coloured all over. Now what happens is that the alcohol will push the colour together and leaves a very dark edge. So you might find that you want to go in and just add a little bit more dark. But whilst the ink is still quite wet, by adding the dark and then a little bit more light, you'll find that it will blend together a lot better. So build up with layers and don't sort of add too much too quickly. Okay, so as I say, add some dark, a bit more light, and then you'll find it will start to all go together. So I'm going to move over to the other ear here, and you want to try and think about sort of where shadows might appear, so where the light might catch the actual ears or the face or the body. Just try and sort of imagine how the light might catch it. And obviously, like under here, under his earlobe, that's naturally going to be darker because it's sort of a layer underneath. So just sort of try and think about that, and always work in little areas. So don't try and colour the whole bunny, just concentrate on little areas really. So I'm just adding some dark edging just to this one side, and I'm going to come in with my light one again. So I'm spreading the colour around a little bit more this time, but what I don't want to lose sight of is those edges. So where the dark meets the light, I want those to blend quite nicely. And again, now that they've blended a little bit, I'm going back in with some more dark and some more light just on those edges. And I'm going to start moving on to his head. So you kind of just go sort of follow the body round, really. This is a slightly different technique to what I'd use if I was doing something like a petal. If you've watched any of my flower videos, you may see that I use a flicking motion quite a lot. But for these, because they're a bigger area, I want them to really blend together. So I find the little circular motions is the best way to go. Now you can see a lot of that dark has disappeared. So I'm just going to come back in, add a little more, and automatically, because it's already wet from the alcohol pens, it's starting to blend naturally. Just a little bit of help and it will blend more together. And then you notice I've left this area here white. Now I don't actually want it to be white, I want it to be very light. So what I'm going to do is just come into those edges. Notice I'm not going all over it this time. I'm just going around sort of those edges of where it joins. Now this has laid down some ink, so I'm coming in, whoops, with my light one again, and I'm just going to add in some more. And then I'm going to go back with my white until it all starts blending together. Now I'm going to let that dry, because when you're actually doing this, it will lighten as you go on. So I tend to come back to it in a little while. Oops, that's the light one. I want the dark one. So I'm going to do a little bit of dark now under his chin, because that would naturally be a darker area. On his paw here. And at the bottom of his tummy. Then I'm going to take the lighter one again. And you can see now how it's all starting to come together. So it's all starting to blend as one, and then we can go in and add some more dark highlights as and when we want them. So this is my colour lifter. Again, it's just softening those edges so I get more of a sort of fluffy sort of look to him. This is the light crumb. Just to bring in some of those dark areas. Okay, so I'm going to let Bunny dry for a moment, and then I'll come back and see if he needs any more dark highlights put into him, or whether I'm quite happy with him the way he is. And I'm going to move on to the baby. So this back ear is naturally going to be slightly darker. Okay, and then I'm going to start with the head again. So the bottom of the chin is going to be darker. It's going to be slightly darker around here and under his ear. As I say, if you just work in smallish areas at any given time, it just makes it easier to blend, because you'll still have moisture in your paper. Whereas if you tend to let it dry and come back to it, then you'll find it's harder to actually blend those colours. It's funny when you move on and you start colouring something else, you automatically start seeing little things in the one you did previously where you want to adjust it. So I tend to do it while I see it. Okay, so I'm going to do this baby just slightly lighter anyway, because I think he would naturally be a bit lighter than his mum. And not colour his towel. Okay, so on Mum, I just want to bring in a little bit more of the crumb cake here. I felt it was a little bit too light in places here, so you know, don't be afraid to come back in and just touch up where you feel that it's not quite right. And again, just add in some little dark highlights if you feel it would just help enhance the actual image. Now if I've done that, then I will just follow it with a little of the lighter as well, again just to soften those edges. Okay, so I think I'm quite happy with Bunny the way he is there, with the exception, see, this is what happens, you move away from it for a second. I just want to add a little bit more dark into his back there. You could keep fiddling like this for hours. This is you know how the blends are. You kind of you could just keep adding layer upon layer just to sort of get your shading correct. Okay, I really am going to leave that alone now. So the next thing I need to do is just to cut out my bunnies. Now I chose to cut these out very close to the actual bodies, so right up to the black line. I just thought it gave it a nicer effect on this particular card. Normally we'd leave a little edge on it, but I just found that because this has got sort of bits and pieces, furry edges, if you kept some and lost some, it looked a bit odd. So I felt that it was easier and it looked nicer just to trim close to the edge on all points. Notice how I'm moving the card, not my scissors. This is a much easier way to get a really nice smooth cut. So there we go, there's our bunny. So if I bring our card back into play, and I'm going to add again some dimensionals to the back of the bunny. and I'm just going to pop him down here. So there we go, that's our completed card. So I've got a girl and a boy one now in my collection, so I hope you like those. You could always add some little more detail over here if you wanted to, but I quite like that plain edge with the actual linen thread. I think it looks really pretty for a little boy card. So I hope you enjoyed that today, and hope you'll give it a go. And if not this particular card, maybe you'll give the stenciling a try, because that is a really, really pretty technique. And as I say, it makes our dies go that much bit further. So it's a really good sort of way of using them. So I hope you like that, and I will see you again next week for another Monday Mashup. Take care. Bye.